Times when you look at things like Confucius and some of those Eastern philosophers and stuff like that, there's so much that has been passed down through that talk about, and then so much of the history we have is because something fantastic enough that you got. All right, welcome to another episode of the Joe and Doug Show. We missed you last Thursday, but we are back. We are here. We are ready to roll. We are going to talk about probably I would say one of Joe's top 5 favorite topics, and maybe top 1, maybe other than time travel and conspiracy theories. We do that from time to time. But
I missed your bellowing voice, though.
Oh, bellowing. Yeah? Bellowing?
Yes, bellowing voice.
I don't know if I've ever been described as bellowing. But we're going to talk about this book, Think and Grow Rich. It was interesting because it was actually a book that, for me, I started seeing pop up on social media, and I was like, oh, I should order that. And I ordered it, and I read the intro and the first chapter, and I was like, man, this reminds me a lot of Joe, some of the things that he would say, and just kind of had that vibe and feel to it. And so we were standing in your kitchen, and I said to you, have you ever read the book Think and Grow Rich? And you were like, hold on a second. He's like, not only have I read it, but I've taught on it. I give it away to people. I keep extras. And so from there, I learned that I had ordered the wrong copy of the book because I had ordered the updated new version. And you were like, no. Let me get you the original version, which you had a copy of. And then I had the opportunity to kind of dive in and read it. So we're going to kind of background this book a little bit, talk through highlights, what it's about, what it's not about, and maybe kind of set up a talk for Thursday on our favorite parts, favorite chapter maybe, of the book. So Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, give us background in 30 seconds.
All right, so this dude was paid to follow around the most influential, powerful people of any time and write down the secrets of their successes and write down what made them, their philosophies, and the secret of all of their successes followed a very, really common theme.
Right, and in every chapter, he says it's in there in every chapter if you can see it. He says that in the beginning, that you have to look for that theme. And
now, are you annoyed by that, or does that fascinate you?
No, that makes me
won't tell you.
That makes me want to dig. And I don't think we should tell people totally what the secret is. They should get the book and dig for themselves. So Napoleon Hill, give me a little bit of background on him. Who was he? When did he live?
He was a nothing author from nowhere that caught the attention of Andrew Carnegie. And the whole thing started off because Carnegie, at the time, Industrial Revolution, knew all of the other, business dealers and money makers of the time, and passed off to his friends and whatnot.
Gotcha. And so he comes into this. Did he write anything else that's worth reading, or just this?
After this, there's one book that it's basically from the perspective of the devil. Okay.
Interesting.
And so Napoleon Hill has these conversations with I think it's called Outwitting the Devil is what it is. And it's really cool because I think every genius in their prime, they make total sense and they're reasonable. And when they stop caring and when they don't care anymore, they go a little bit into crazy town, right? And I think that was the crazy town when it came to Napoleon.
Okay. And so he follows around. Who are some of the people that he follows around? I know there's an updated version that you say is not as good, but people that aren't familiar with history may not even know who Andrew Carnegie is. So start with Andrew Carnegie, and who else does he kind of follow around? Who are some of the key highlights, people in the book?
Okay, so in the first chapter, when you're going, if you listen to the audiobook or read it, he basically says thanks to all of the people that he helped with it, and then they wrote a little one-liner about you should always teach this in schools and blah, blah, blah. And some of those people were like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, the Kodak guy. There was a couple of presidents mixed in there, a bunch of senators in there. So pretty much anybody you can think of. Westinghouse had a stint in there.
So pretty substantial.
Yes, for sure.
In the realm of books today, right? Everybody goes and we're gonna buy a book on the 7 steps to prosperity, or the 6 things that are gonna, and everything's very incremental. It's in sound bites and tweets, and this is a little different in the sense that he's not necessarily giving you step 1, step 2, step 3.
Correct.
But he sort of is.
Okay, so I look at this like one of the first chapters, I forget which it is. He defines education having the root word in Latin, which is educo, which is to draw out. And so the whole premise of the book is not to give you stuff to memorize. It's to draw out a feeling. Like he'll say a thing, and then you will put your own connections into that thing. I've read the book so many times, and every time I read it, I don't get a better understanding into the words. I fill in different details to the formulas, and I get different perspective out of the same chapter.
So very Socratic thought.
Yes,
Socratic
for
method. So in this, when did you first read it, and what was your first take on it? Do you remember the first time? Who gave it to you? What season of life were you in? When did you get it?
So I would go to Barnes & Noble pretty regularly to buy, not improvement books or anything like that, but I was really into technology at the time, and I wanted to learn everything I could about everything. And I just happened to, the technology books are on this side, and the self-help is on this side. So it's like right behind you. I just happened to grab it, right, and just read a paragraph while I was waiting, and I got sucked into it.
Yeah.
And what I kept reading it, and I got hung up on the, I'll tell you, the secret is in here, and it's on every chapter, and I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it's in every chapter, and I'm like, what is it? Just tell me. And it drove me mad a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree with that. I got off to the races, and like I think I got through 2 chapters by the time I said to you, "Hey, this book kind of sounds like you," and you were like, "Hey," and then you gave me this version, which is the same version, just with the original stories. They just update the stories in the new version
with more modern people
with
and more
Steve Jobs and
exactly.
so on. But I think for me, in my first kind of go at it, I think the things that really highlighted. The inspirational stories, obviously, like, wow, that's so cool. You know, they were so willing to just risk everything and go for it. And some of the principles that are there, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And some things weren't as curious, but I think the biggest thing for me that jumped off was just the ability to kind of set your sail wherever you're going to set your sail and go for it.
And I think the biggest stumbling in the title is rich.
Correct.
So immediately you think currency.
Yes.
And it could be further from the truth. Whatever you put into richness is what belongs in that word. And that's what this formula is. You take a word and you fill in your own scenario, and it's the same outcome. I don't care if you put money or love or inspiration or goals. It's all the same thing.
Yeah, I think I showed it to my wife and a couple other people, and that was the thing they got hung up on was
right.
Like, grow rich, like, you know, you're a pastor. Should you want to grow rich? And I'm like, it's not necessarily about money. You need to understand money may play a part in it if you want to have money, but it's really about kind of hacking the human spirit and yourself and everything that is wired into you, and figuring out how to really step out and just throw things to the one story that stands out is the guy that like sold himself. I'm forgetting his name right now, but it's in like the first or second chapter. He put himself in a back of a railroad car, had nothing, shows up at I think it's Edison's shop, and like is like, hey, Westinghouse, not Westinghouse, the guy Barnes who sold for him, sold by Barnes, made by Edison. That's the tag. But he just shows up and starts cleaning the shop and makes Edison give him a job. And I guess when Napoleon Hill asked Edison, well, why did you even give him a job? And he's like, I knew he wasn't going to go away. Like there was that, like Edison read into his spirit. There was no quit in him. And so he's like, well, I had to give him a room. I had to give him something to do because he wasn't going anywhere. And that for me was the first story that I was like, ooh, I'm in, and kind of lurched forward. What's one or two highlight stories for you in here that you're like, that one grabbed me and pulled me in?
You know what? I've read every chapter, and so why don't you do this? Why don't you open a chapter and read one of the titles of the chapter, and I'll give you that version of it, because literally I use every chapter for something different.
Let's do it. So,
and the ghosts of failure, or the ghosts of fear.
Yeah.
You know, that's a good one, because it's not necessarily one that I use, but I see it in so many of the people that I care about. It helps me teach people why they're setting themselves up for their own, demise. Those problems.
Yeah. So it deals with things like desire and faith and imagination, decision, persistence, so on and so forth. And you and I have spent a lot of time talking about faith and the ability to believe, and the kind of some of the principles in law of attraction, as well as some spiritual principles with that. why don't we talk about the persistence is a good one, and the subconscious mind I know is probably a favorite of yours.
One of my favorites, yeah.
So I don't know, one of those 2 chapters.
Okay, so the subconscious. Well, you know what? We did subconscious mind last time. I don't want to dedicate.
Let's do persistence.
Okay, yeah. So persistence. This is Darby, right?
Mm-hmm.
You remember the story? So a guy gets his head full of that he wants to dig for gold, and he invests a lot of his own and a lot of other people's money into buying the mining equipment to mine some gold. And what ends up happening is that he early on gets a taste for the gold, and he mines some, and he's like, "Oh, look at, we got this," and everybody's excited now. He gets that first taste of success, and then so everybody's even bought him even further. And what ends up happening is they get a certain point, and it looks like the gold's drying up, like the vein is gone, and now bad despair is happening, and now he's got all these people that are trusting him, and he's not going to be able to come through, and he gives up. Right. And so he sells all the mining equipment and to a junk dealer, and the junk dealer buys all the stuff and says, "Oh, maybe I can mine for the gold here." And so that dude goes out and hires a specialist that knows fault lines and tells him that 10 feet from where he stopped digging, then the gold will resume. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So this little story, this little parable of persistence, you don't know how many times you stop that 10 feet, because usually when you give up, you bail on it and never go back. But this story lets you see how close the dude was to coming through on everything that he hoped it would be, because he gave into the first fear. You and I had a bunch of discussions about how this process works over and over and over in our perception, where you have an idea, and you get a little taste from it, right? And then it doubles back on you, and you want to give up, and you have the despair, and then you get it, and it's just a cycle that goes over and over again.
No, absolutely. It reminds me of a story in Scripture. I often tell people the book of Daniel. Daniel prays for 21 days for an answer to prayer, for God to show up and intervene, and on the 21st day, an angel shows up with the answer. And the short version is the angel was like, "Listen, I was fighting to get here." And I often say to people, what would happen if you stopped praying on day 19? You would have prayed all that time, and then does the angel not show up on day 21 because you stopped praying a day short? That persistence is so important. And then I think of the Wright brothers right here from Ohio. The Wright brothers and Langley, who nobody really knows who Langley is, but there's an airport named after him.
Right. A very important one of that.
Yes. But Langley was funded by the government. He had all the best minds working for him. He had tons of money. He had everything that he could possibly need. And the Wright brothers had a bicycle shop. And
who wins? Guess.
Yeah. And the Wright brothers, though, were in it because they believed differently. Langley was in it for the prestige. He was in it for a number of different reasons. Right. Where the Wright brothers, on the other hand, they would take extra parts because they knew how many times they would crash between then and dinner. And so they'd bring extra parts from the bicycle shop just so they could try again. And then when they finally take flight, Langley quits. He quits the day after it's in the newspapers and everything else. Langley had the New York Times following him around, waiting for him to take flight. And nobody was there to see the Wright brothers take flight. They all found out about it a few days later. But once he heard about it, he was done. It wasn't his passion. He wasn't willing to persist on it. And persistence is one of those things that I think for a lot of people, when you read a book like this, you go, "Oh, I would do that," but in the throes of it, and you really got to dig deep to not stop at 10 feet, to use that illustration.
Yeah. And the relationship that you have with all of the negative, the vices of fear and of doubt. And that's what this really book is about, is keeping those things in check. It's not just about taking the optimistic side and overblowing them for the sake of doing it. But if one wins, like, you're going to always buy into the gold's not going to resume, and you're always going to quit. And then it's not the other way, where you just dig in the dirt and think that there's going to be gold there. Yeah. There's got to be some mind behind it, as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a both and when you look at this, how many people total did he interview? I think it was over 500 or something like that.
Yeah.
And
it took 20 years. I mean, that in itself, the book is an example of the book.
Yeah, it's crazy. So good. That is so good. And that was a different era of leaders, of men, of people. I mean, you're talking Great Depression, you're talking, Industrial Revolution, turn of the century. It was just a different breed of business person and leader. Wasn't as much regulation. A lot of stuff was very cutthroat. It's just a different quality of people, from, JP Morgan to Carnegie to, a number of those guys that just broke through and built these empires, and I mean, gobbled people up. And in some cases, a lot of the monopoly laws and stuff like that come out of that kind of season of business. But those are the quality people that he's interviewing, and that's the space. They didn't have anything holding them back but themselves.
Right. And in today's analog, I mean, it might not be as Wild Westy as it once was.
Right, that's better.
But it's still the same premises,
Yep, exactly.
Where, the payoff and the risk were maybe bigger back then. It's still the same in its same like proportions.
Yeah, no, it definitely has great applications for stuff today. Is this a book that everyone should read, or just entrepreneurs? Because sometimes
I honestly think the title keeps the people away from it that shouldn't be reading it. So if they get hung up on it, usually you're not supposed to until you can dig into it and not be offended by, the words having a literal, concrete, deal. So.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite things about it, and that chapter about fear, the ghosts that chase you away from all of these things, what I learned and what I did, and it's not in this book, but I actually did this myself, where if you take all the vices and virtues and you line them up, and you take the strongest virtue, which is love, and then you put the strongest vice, which is hate, right? And you put them, it creates an antidote. Like, you already knew the love-hate thing was probably thing, but there's some that are down the line that if you want to know like what the antidote to procrastination is, you draw a line over to its vice along the side, and or its virtue on the other side, and what to bring out of you to conquer this. Like, love doesn't conquer all of those things. There's an actual parallel on each side of it. I'll have to show you my list one of these days. Yeah. Maybe we'll even do it on the next program.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Because I think everybody's looking at, and a lot of times can't overcome those vices because they're trying to do it through the wrong virtue.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You've mentioned twice how you don't like the title. What would you rename the book if you got to rename the book?
See, I want more people to get the information in there, and I understand that it's a natural filter that keeps people up. But if let's just say like-minded people, if I can just make the title like interpretive, because it's a whole book is an interpretive book about whatever you throw into it. Yeah. And so like, I think the whole thing is wrapped in a riddle that's, wrapped in a parable.
That's good.
And so it should be something like that, more artistic rather than
concrete like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, this looks like you're going to get like 7 principles on how to invest, and it genuinely.
Why am I reading this?
Exactly.
If you say that the book's 100 years old, right, and that it has universal concepts that span 100 years, you can fill in new names and it all makes sense. It's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, if I was going to pick the one space out in here that I feel like I'm fairly good at, I enjoyed the desire side, but I think from you, the thing that I've been learning the most is and we talked about this, I don't want to get too far on this, but the subconscious mind, training that and really being intentional in reprogramming that space, and not just assuming it's going to follow your desires or assuming it's going to follow your
beliefs. I won't get too deep in this, but I want to give you a little primer, to really tell you what I'm talking about, and we won't do the math behind it. So I find myself even to this day, like making that mistake of not using the subconscious. Okay. So long and short is the subconscious and the conscious, 2 different parts, right? The conscious part, flowery language, and you do thinking and have great ideas, and it's very exciting. Subconscious is like a caveman, right? Talks in binary code. It doesn't have, a bunch of adjectives. It's yes, no. It's light switch on, off. And so in order to take something and hand it off to the subconscious, you got to dumb it down into yes, no's. You got to distill it way down into its most simple parts. So you got to give away that you're not going to make this, exciting, dramatic deal. It's got to be a really short stand. So for instance, if I want something, all right, I have to start behaving like I have that thing, and not in a way where I don't believe that I'm going to have it. Right. So for instance, if I'm going to have we'll use one of the examples that's in one of the books that we'll talk about later. A lady was like, I really want a husband. And then the narrator of the book said, no, you don't. And she said, no, really, I do. And let's walk in your closet. Does this closet look like somebody who has enough space to have a husband? Is this garage have enough space for somebody else to park a car here? Can somebody put shoes here? Can somebody do this? And you just went around your life and saying, you're not behaving like you want. So it's more about husband equals is a symptom of all of your behaviors added up. Right. And that triggers that, that's how the subconscious works. You basically take just like we talked about last time we did the show, you have this mountain of probability, right? Well, how probable is that you're going to have a husband? Well, you're not doing much to make that happen. The more you do adds to that probability. Yeah.
We talked about it with us preparing to sell our house. And I cleared out the basement, and we did a couple of those things like, yes, we put the house on the market, but were we preparing and creating room for somebody else to be in? Were we packing boxes? Well, we hadn't sold the house yet. What if we don't sell the house? Then we have all this stuff in boxes. No, we're believing we're going to sell the house, so we're going to position ourselves as if we're selling the house. And sometimes I want to see how far you'd be willing to take that. Preachers have gotten themselves in trouble. People will want a healing. Right. And I've seen preachers do this and people, I've seen them take off and break their glasses at the altar because God's going to heal me and I'm going to be able to see. And then they got to pay for another pair of glasses sometimes. And so there's certainly a tension in that. And it's certainly something I do in counseling and coaching with people when people are like, I used to love this one as a youth pastor. You'd hear girls say, all guys are just like dogs. I keep finding all that. My response was, well, stop dressing like a Scooby snack. Stop.
That's a good line. Good line.
If all you want, right, is if you just keep catching swamp things, stop fishing in the swamp. Like there's some simple things in that premise, but just like you were saying about preparing for the husband or the job or the car, you tell people dress for the job that you want. Start. What does a CEO do? Do they get up and you want to run your own company? Great. Well, what does that look like? We'll start waking up at 4 a.m.
Well, and one of the things I hate, but I love at the same time, is that there's an adage about fake it till you make it.
Yeah, I hate that.
And it technically is right.
I know.
But it's technically wrong at the same time. And because a lot of these people get kind of coaxed into thinking that they created something from faking it is because they started behaving like they had the thing.
Yep.
And so the world started responding to them behaving in that different deal. But the problem is once the tasty parts are gone of behaving like that, and if you start rejecting the ones that really matter, that have some responsibility and have some thorns to them, then the whole thing evaporates. And now you don't believe in anything because, you tested it, it started working out, and then you bailed.
Yeah. No, 100%. And then people grow cynical.
Exactly.
Yep, absolutely. It's always funny, people were always like, well, dress like the job that you want. And I've seen the meme that says, well, what does an eccentric billionaire wear? His pajamas is the correct answer.
Yep.
No, I think this book's a great start. A lot of people aren't readers, though. I think the statistic is something like most people that graduate from college leave school and never read another full book in their life. More than 50%.
Well, can I tell you, I'm one of those people.
Yes.
I don't read books.
Okay.
I've read that one.
Yep.
But it was against everything. I mean, the book has to be so inviting in order for that to happen.
So people will buy books, but they don't always read them. They'll put them on their bookshelf. They may read the intro. They may read a chapter. So if somebody picked this up and said, all right, Joe said it's really good. He read it. It's the only book he's read after he left college. If they're only going to read one chapter in here, what's the one chapter they should read?
Give me this. I'll sample this sucker out.
Let's do it.
And I think we should. The next show we do should be the Ghosts of Fear, because I think that's most helpful. Most of our people they squander most of their opportunities because of that. Once you name it, you can't even go into it and make excuses once you know how this stuff works, because then you just got to refer to it. I was told going into this.
Yep. One chapter. What's the one that got me?
So I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with Desire, because that's the beginning of it.
Yeah.
The Coke story. It all begins the idea and the wanting something, and it's so hard to teach people to want something.
Yes. I agree. That was going to be my chapter. So ditto. Desire is an interesting thing though, because leading an organization that's full of volunteers. We have a small paid staff, but most every bit of work that gets done at the church is volunteers. And there's this great book by Max Dupree called Leading Without Power, and it's all about leading volunteers. And basically the argument is when you're leading and you have a paycheck to dangle, like you have some exterior motivation, even if they don't necessarily agree with the mission, they're not totally on board with the culture, they'll show up for a good paycheck and a decent work environment. And he said, but when you're leading volunteers, you don't have that. And so you have to sell them on the vision and, being a good leader, and they got to buy in is kind of his point. But in doing that with a volunteer organization, I think one of the things that I often find is people will want to be used, they want to step in, they want to help, they want to feel useful, but sometimes they step in to do a job and not what they're passionate about. And I hate with a passion as a leader going around trying to light a fire under people's butts that said they wanted to do something and they didn't really want to do something. They wanted to be a part of the group. They had other motivations, and that's fine, but they really didn't have a passion for what they're doing. And then I have to go around and go, and I'm the constant source for that. I would much rather have somebody that's burning on fire, maybe doesn't quite get what I'm doing, but they are ready to roll, and their vision and my vision intersect, and I can just go and blow them in the right direction. I think Dave Ramsey says, hire thoroughbreds and let them run. Get out of the way. You already know they have, the gifts and talents and abilities to go where you want to go. So do it. But desire is one of those things that's tough because you can't teach it. Do you agree with that?
Oh, totally. Well, but our culture has become so transactional that there isn't any kind of desire. There's basically little segments of exchange. And so like when somebody went, like you mentioned, if they're red hot with this, really on fire, there's nothing going to stop you from doing it. They're not even going to hardly ask you. They're just going to go do it. You just happen to be along the interstate at the time.
No, absolutely. And I think when you find those people having enough discernment within yourself to know if that's a train you want to ride or a train you want to wave as they go by is important, because a lot of times leaders, especially in volunteer stuff, I got this idea and we could do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Not really where I'm at, but man, they're really excited and that could be a quick, easy win. And you buy into a short-term thing. And then you get in there and long-term, you're like, this isn't sustainable. I can't believe we picked to do this. And you only have yourself to blame.
There's a way of figuring out the calibration between people. There's a mastermind chapter. Okay. And when you take a bunch of alpha people in a room, most of them are in different directions, right? They're moving in different directions. It's really hard to get those people to work together unless that you have some sort of like a common interest that's defined when you do that deal. So I have a couple guys that we bounce ideas off of. I can't spend a lot of time with those people, but I can use their energy when we need it. And that's, we get together, we get each other, and we go bounce off the walls. Right. And so it's not about the social side where you do very little socialization because of this book, but you have a better understanding of when you do socialization, what you're getting from it.
No, that's really good. And I think as leaders, I think my job is to help my team, help the volunteers hack their desire, their passion, and put them in places where they can just flow rather than it being a have to. It's a get to. And people work differently and serve differently when they're in get tos versus have tos. Like, all right, I guess I have to do that. Well, I don't want anybody to have to do anything. Right. If you have to do it, don't bother. We'll find somebody that gets to do it. And when it's a privilege to do it, you do it differently. You enter into it differently. It's a different mentality. I was saying this past weekend in my message, I talked about, the Apostle Paul says that all runners who run the race run to win. And I said, there's no participation trophies in this. Everybody's setting out to win. And when you're showing up not just to run, you're showing up not just to play, but you're showing up to win, you play differently. You train differently. You think differently. And some people are just kind of, they're not really showing up to life. And my encouragement this weekend was like, we need you. Right. The world needs you.
I teach this class about once a year. We'll put together, and my favorite people to show up to class are the cynics. They are my absolute favorite.
You're a glutton for punishment.
and why that's important is because the the perspective of someone who doesn't believe you
Mm-hmm.
is more powerful than someone like I consider you sort of advanced in this, right?
Okay.
We're talking about advancing, but the guy that's got nothing going
Mm-hmm.
for him and is buying into the hope that this book somehow can make their life
Mm-hmm.
better is better, because I'm going to say something like, start using your subconscious. You're like, shut up. I can't do that tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
Everything
yeah.
we're talking about, they're going to say, yeah, I probably can't do that tomorrow.
Yeah,
and
I've
not
tried
going
that
to.
before.
Right.
Yep.
But if you can give, like, what can I do today that doesn't sound like a self-help book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, what can I do today? Like, this is my pastor that's sitting in front of me, right? You know what I do on Sundays? I correct your language.
Yeah.
I do that with everybody, but I correct your language.
Yeah.
This most optimistic guy I know, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll use phraseology that's wrong to me.
Yeah.
And so while you're doing your sermon, I'm going, right? and I'll correct you.
Your wife says she actually corrects the worship songs sometimes.
The worship
too.
songs too,
Yeah.
right? Because some of the songs are worded
When they're in the negative.
in the improper
Yeah.
deal. So I'll give you a sort of an example of someone who's smarter than me phrased this a lot better. And I'm paraphrasing, so I'll even screw that up. But Mother Teresa,
Yeah.
right? Mother Teresa said that she would not show up at an anti-war rally, right? But she would show up at a peace rally.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what we're talking about right now. Setting yourself up so you're using the proper language, because if all you do is talk about what you don't want, desire doesn't work, because all you're doing is throwing out those words. Remember, subconscious, caveman speak, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing it hears is like the noun. So if you say, I'd really like to make my life better, but I hate all things, right? What did it hear? Hate all things. And
Yeah,
now once
yeah.
you set it up. So what you could start doing tomorrow, just changing how you talk to the world around you, and invert some language. Instead of saying what you don't want, just say everything that you do want.
Yeah.
Nothing. Just say, skip all of the negatives. Can't, won't, shouldn't, don't, blah, 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 blah. Anything that ends in NT, don't do it. Right?
Yeah.
And just talk about what you do want. And then you'll spend all of your time desiring what you do want. You won't have time to get to the stuff you don't want.
It's good. I think, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but I think Aristotle said something along the lines that, when you want to make a change in your life, don't focus on the things you need to stop doing, just start doing new things.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
It very much makes sense, because we put all that effort into, well, how am I going to stop doing this? Well, no, you just need to start doing these things. I've sat in a few conferences over the last 15 years or so. And one of them, at the beginning of the session, they had us pull out a piece of paper and write down, what are 3 things I need to start doing, 3 things I need to keep doing, and 3 things I need to stop doing. And then they did this session on leadership, and they taught some nuggets and different things. And at the end of the session, they were hoping that what they taught would change and forget about the things that you don't want to do. Let's add 3 more things you do want to do. And it was a good lesson in that sense, that most of us are focusing on filling the bottomless cup, the cup with a hole in it that we keep pouring into, and it never gets filled. And it's all the can'ts and the shouldn'ts and the wouldn'ts and the couldn'ts, instead of, all right, let's just find a cup that's not broken, and we'll just start pouring in there, and we'll start with that one.
Yeah. And so, like, feeding someone who's already hungry is an easy chore.
Right.
But we're going to go back to my friend Marty, and this was my best cynic. This is my best cynic moment, because it was fun. We were talking about the chapter about exactly what we're talking about now. And Marty was looking really confused, and he said, listen, I can say that the sky is purple all I want. It doesn't make the sky purple.
Yeah.
And I said, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make the sky purple. And what I got to illustrate to him is the goal in this is not to tell yourself unbelievable things. If your life sucks, then what you're going to find is, when you look inside yourself, you're not going to have very much stuff to brag about or to say good about. And that's the first thing that needs to change, is your attitude about the things that are around you. So if all you're discovering is things that are unbelievable, wait till you get to faith. That's not going to work out for you either, because you got to believe the stuff. The example that I used with you early on was, there's a point where if you start saying things that you're capable of and things that are possible, and you keep ramping it up and magnifying it, there's a point that you stop believing. Like, you can go out and make $1 today. You can go out and make $5. Right. I can get to a number that you're going to say, probably not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting though, when you break things down, you use the financial ones easy, because we can wrap our head around the increments. But I think it's something like, if you make $270 a day or something along those lines, $275, you'll make 6 figures in a year. And most people are like, oh, 6 figures impossible, but I can make $200 in a day. I can make $250 in a day. Yep. And thinking through that, and not just, $275 in a day. Well, no, that's 10 transactions of $27.50? Can I sell 10 things for $27.50? And breaking it down into those, you know, kind of incremental things makes it a little more palatable. But I find once you unlock a couple of these, like all of a sudden it's like, once you make 6 figures, then all of a sudden it's like, well, 7 figures isn't that far.
That's exactly right.
It switches things where when you're making 30,000 and you're in negative town and all this stuff, yeah, you're never, you know, only rich people make that kind of money and whatever, or only these people have happy marriages or whatever. It doesn't have to be money to take it out of the
figure that you no longer believe applies to you.
Exactly. And but you watch people obsess about that, and they build a whole life around it. We're going to talk about fear on Thursday, aren't we?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think that's a good one. So people should pick this up. They can order on Amazon, right?
Yeah, and there's
Joe
an audiobook.
I did not write this. We don't get any royalty, but we both read it, and he's read it a bunch and taught it. So people should get it at Amazon.
You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from any of the bookstores that are around here. The audiobook, there's a couple of versions of the audiobook. It's one of those
like
licensed
Samuel L.
books
Jackson
that people
reading it to you.
Oh, that would
we should get Samuel L. Jackson.
That would be good. But anyway, the original one is the one you want to go after. I can actually look it up and post it back to this video who the narrator is. But there's a couple versions. There's an Australian guy. I listen to that one every once in a while just because I like his voice. But I like the original one better.
Definitely. Well, this is our day talking about our podcast, talking about Think and Grow Rich. We are going to do the chapter on ghosts and fear on Thursday. And so we hope that you'll join us back here on Thursday at 6:00.
Thank you for listening to this show on Youngstown Studio. If you like our programming, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page, or subscribe to your favorite podcast platform like iTunes or Spotify. This is original Youngstown content, and we would appreciate you sharing the videos and the word about it.